Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one rice, not a blade of grass. We love the open country of the Rupununi and the Essequibo, the time of night. Though we may criticize it, this is our home, we love it, and we need to keep it. We have that right. So we ain't giving up no mountain, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one rice, not a blade of grass. So we ain't giving up no mountains, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one rice, not a blade of grass. We are a peaceful people, struggle is we struggle, and we don't look for trouble, just ask around. But when outside faces from foreign places talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. We ain't giving up no mountains, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one rice, not a blade of grass. This land is all I know, we gonna make it somehow. We will bend like a bow and never break. Our fathers came here, and they lived and died here, and we ain't moving nowhere. Big mistake, cause we ain't giving up no mountain, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one rice, not a blade of grass. We love the open country of the Rupununi and the Essequibo, the time of night. Though we may criticize it, this is our home, we love it, and we need to keep it. We have that right. So we ain't giving up no mountain, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one rice, not a blade of grass. So we ain't giving up no mountains, we ain't giving up no tree.
Please be seated. Mr. Clerk.
Presentation of petitions, presentations of papers and reports, reports from committees, oral questions without notice, questions and notice, statements by ministers including policy statements, personal explanations, requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Assembly on definite matters of urgent public importance, motions relating to the business or sittings of the Assembly and move introduction of bills, public business, government's business motions.
Honorable members, the first motion stands in the name of the Honorable Minister of Natural Resources. Honorable Rebecca Ganesh, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, members of the opposition, my fellow colleagues on the government side, media, audience all, a pleasant day to you. Today I stand here to move the motion titled, The Implementation of Policies to Reduce the Effects of Climate Change. Madam Speaker, a quote from Rajendra Pachauri agrees that climate change is real. We have just a small opportunity and it is rapidly closing. There is not a moment to lose. The issue of climate change has been a prevalent one that creates an obstacle for the smooth progression of the country's growth economically as it affects various sectors including natural resources. The ability of forests and other ecosystems to provide culturally and economically important services such as fishing, fisheries, and hunting are likely to decline as a result of human-caused climate change due to the increased disturbance in water stress, fires, pest outbreaks, and most importantly, global warming. These negative impacts will increase with the higher rates of warming, and thus we as the government will implement a policy to monitor the deforestation rate in areas prone to flooding, while also promoting afforestation, which will allow the rainwater to be soaked up, preventing the runoff water from damaging local farms. Madam Speaker, on the 11th of September 2017, Honorable Vice President Bharat Jagdeo would have mentioned that science is agreeing to those who say that humans are contributors to climate change. With the necessary strategies in place to make this matter better known to the citizens of Guyana, my Ministry of Natural Resources, along with the government, will be able to mitigate the effects of global warming, land degradation and erosion, tree mortality, forest reduction, and desertification due to these fluctuating weather patterns. As we all know, Guyana is currently around 0.5 to 1 meters below sea level. Since farming is done extensively in these areas of that region, and the capital Georgetown is located there, it therefore becomes a challenge for drainage and irrigation during prolonged periods of flooding. Flooding is Guyana's biggest disaster because we are below sea level, and because of this and the consistent flooding that hinder the cultivation of rice, sugar, and crops grown locally. In addition to that, we also have occasional droughts in the Rupununi area. We as the government will enact a policy to create outreach programs to inform the citizens of Guyana to be informed about climate-smart agriculture. This aims in productivity and also enables the citizens to adapt to resilience to climate change. Don't you think it's logical that us as the government would want to put implementations to reduce this, not only to benefit us, but to benefit our future generations? Madam Speaker, when it relates to the area of gold and bauxite, many mines are located in areas that can suffer from these challenging and extreme weather conditions. With more and more companies becoming aware of this impact that it can have on their operation and prevent the consistent export of these resources to be carried out, I, as the Minister of Natural Resources, will enact a policy to utilize more solar energy and power walls to promote the low-carbon emission. From the low-carbon development strategy, the country can create a model for avoiding deforestation and manufacturing forests and maintaining forests, while at the same time growing the economy fivefold within a time span of 10 years and keeping energy emissions flat. Investing in urban, rural, and Amerindian development, protecting the coast and hinterland from these climate changes, creating jobs in the suit of low-carbon sectors, aligning the education and health sectors with low-carbon development, and integrating Guyana's economy with its neighbors. In the 2021 budget, a significant portion of the $135 million in climate-related funds from Norway will be invested towards renewable energy. Solar farms from Madia, Bartica, and Letem are under construction, and 2 mini hydropower plants are currently being developed. In conclusion, Madam Speaker, with this motion proposed, it goes without uncertainty that climate change is a hurdle that us as a nation can come together to reduce its devastating impacts. As such, we as the government will continue to work assiduously on the implementation of Guyana's National Climate Change Policy and Action Plan 2020 to 2030, along with other climate change policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Alyssa Isaacs, Shadow Minister of Natural Resources, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good morning, ladies, gentlemen, and fellow parliamentarians. Today, I would like to begin my speech with a quote by environmental activist Sir David Attenborough. The best motto to think about is to not waste things. Don't waste electricity, don't waste paper, don't waste food. Live the way you want to live, but just don't waste. Look after the natural world and the animals in it, and the plants in it too. This is their planet as well as ours. Don't waste them. In 21st century Guyana, it is more noticeable than ever the effects of climate change, from the rise in daily diurnal temperatures, irregular rainy and dry seasons, and an increase in savanna fires in interior regions. In the government's climate change motion, it was highlighted that they wish to implement policies that will provide more stringent means of dealing with the climate crisis, and I would like to share my views on the matter. Initially highlighted in the government's motion would be the idea to establish policies that would be enforced upon individuals and businesses with eco-friendly alternatives. The thought put into this idea can be commended. However, I would like to bring to light the fact that there would inevitably be a serious lack of funding available to implement policies and fines. It cannot be ignored that the main issue with adopting policies and institutions to follow climate change protocols, not only in Guyana but globally, wouldn't be the lack of monetary resources, but the willingness to comply with these measures. Everyone in this forum knows that the reality of the matter is funding is needed in every aspect of development. Whether it is sponsorships or grants or loans, it is necessary. Because of the economies of scale of larger companies and the pushback climate change policy would put on their daily operations, many would be reluctant to adapt. Some may even downright refuse. More thought on a point like this could have been placed when presenting the first point of your motion. Now more than ever, climate change is an important topic, not only regionally but on a global scale. However, we have to acknowledge the difficult truth that there is a large percentage of the population that are unaware or unwilling to take actions against the changes brought about by this environmental phenomenon. As a result of a lack of education, awareness, and a conscious effort, as well as a tendency to underestimate this particular global issue, it will be incredibly difficult to impose changes through policies. Highlighted in the LCDS 2030, there were plans to have educational programs put to action. However, I strongly believe that more efforts, more actions need to be established and quickly. Implementing policies is not the first step to change, but rather we should be desperately focusing on shifting the status quo. Show people the importance of change, the change needed to save our planet. One idea that should be taken into consideration to approach climate change would be to start with the smaller steps. Simple things such as community outreaches, educational programs, and more in-depth discussions in classrooms can help spread awareness, and from that can snowball into people taking more conscious efforts to make changes in their everyday routines. whether it is buying energy-saving light bulbs, taking public transport opposed to private, or recycling, it can all make a difference. One ideology which has been imposed in other economies around the world that I believe is a prolific strategy for Guyana to adopt would be carbon pricing. Carbon pricing involves a cost being placed on carbon emissions that is aimed at deterring polluters from continuous contamination.
Honorable member, you have 1 minute remaining.
By executing an initiative such as this, we could see a swifter change in emissions and eventually improvement in other environmental aspects. My final point will highlight the fact that there is a lack of a workforce that is trained in specialized jobs and knowledgeable about environmental issues which would be needed to implement change. Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, said in a recent speech at the G20 Forum in Glasgow, "How many more voices and how many more pictures of people must we see without being able to move? Or are we so blinded and hardened that we can no longer appreciate the cries of humanity?" Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Darian Lucas, Minister of Health, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I stand here to fully support the motion which states, and I quote, "The government should implement policies to reduce the impact of climate change," end of quote. Due to these two reasons and how we, the government, will confront climate change in Guyana. Firstly, the flooding of hinterland and coastal communities in our country. Secondly, the changing of weather patterns due to climate change, and to develop a way in which we can confront climate change to protect the citizens of our country. Madam Speaker, we are all aware of the fact that polar ice caps are melting, sea levels are rising, coastal areas are flooding, diseases are becoming more widespread, and marine and wetland ecosystems are changing. Firstly, Madam Speaker, we all know that our country is below sea level, and right now, the people of the hinterland and coastal communities are suffering. According to an article dated 20th of June 2021, the Prime Minister of Guyana announced, and I quote, that some 29,300 households in more than 300 communities has been affected by the current flood, end of quote. Members of this honorable house, will we sit back and watch our people suffer? I hope not. Members of the opposition, crisis caused by climate change will not wait. Let me remind you, we the government will implement policies to combat the changes being brought on by climate change. Secondly, Madam Speaker, members of the opposition and attentive audience, we all know that the weather pattern has changed, and there is no longer a rainy season or dry season. This is all because of climate change, and these weather changing patterns are caused by human activities which leads to global warming. Madam Speaker, let me bring the attention to this honorable house. Farmers of this nation has been greatly affected by weather changing patterns. This will no doubt be a threat to food security in our great nation. Farmers on the coastland and hinterland are not making their harvest they were once making. According to Sunita Narayan, a vegetable farmer whose land lies close to Guyana's coast, who long depended on her farm for an income, states, and I quote, "Flooding recently destroyed about 100 valuable eggplants on the farm," end of quote. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Farmers in Region 1 and 9 has been suffering also. Their cassava farm, main staple in some communities, and cash crops are being destroyed due to the heavy than usual rainfall and flooding. Members of the opposition, don't you see our people are suffering from shortage of food as well? Madam Speaker and my fellow colleagues of the opposition, food security is our top priority, and Guyana has called to be the food basket of the Caribbean. We cannot let our nation endure a famine when we could reduce the impact of climate change by implementing policies now. Madam Speaker, in addition, harmful gases including sulfur dioxide and carbon monoxide, which are all present in smoke, is polluting the air day by day as we continue to burn fossil fuels in the various industries present in Guyana. Madam, according to the Director of World Health Organization, WHO, Dr. Maria Neira states, and I quote, "Air pollutant cause respiratory disease, heart disease, stroke, lung cancer, and it reduces the growth of green plants," end of quote. Members of this honorable house, air pollution is one of the biggest public health issues we are confronting today in Guyana. Well, if you don't see that, then you are totally blind. Thirdly, Madam Speaker, with all these problems that climate change is causing today, we, the government, can confront climate change and put these problems to rest once and for all. Because we, the government, say enough is enough. Members, we can reduce pollution by using alternative resources of energy, use organic fertilizer and biodegradable pesticides, disposing of waste using appropriate methods. Members of the opposition, we the government can help fight climate change by restoring natural resources. For example, use alternative resource of energy, replace renewable resource, reuse and recycle resource, set up breeding programs and nature resorts, engage in smart farming. We would create educational programs to continually assess the health of ecosystem and sign international agreements to control pollution and conserve natural resources. Madam Speaker, members of the opposition, all of these are solutions that can help combat climate change in Guyana. In conclusion, I have a simple question to the members of this honorable House and to the listening audience. Do you want to see our people suffer as a result of climate change when we can do something about it? Then stand and agree with us, the government, to implement policies in order to stop climate change on Guyana. We, the people of this great nation, is of one destiny. So let us mean that destiny with pride as we strive for a better future for this beautiful land we call home. Thank you. I rest my case.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Members, when your time is up, you can ask for an extension of 1 minute. Honorable Indrani Prasad, Shadow Minister of Housing and Water, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good morning, everyone. I am Indrani Prasad, Shadow Minister of Housing and Water. Quote, climate change is already an urgent threat to million lives. Madam Speaker, we all acknowledge that the government is implementing climate change policies and we are grateful for that. But do you think, Madam Speaker, is that all they can do? Don't we agree that more needs to be done? Shouldn't all efforts be placed to adapt to climate change? Quote Ronald Reagan, preservation of our environment is not liberal or conservative challenge, it's common sense. End quote. Madam Speaker, the government needs to pay more attention and take a more stronger measure to mitigate climate change as soon as possible in order to avoid the most catastrophic effects like places in the interior. People are conscious of some of the effects of climate change, such as an extreme rainfall that leads to widespread flooding. This flooding forces them to leave their homes and live elsewhere. Interestingly, however, they do not know that these bad things are linked directly to climate change. With 90% of our population living on the coast, which lies below sea level, and on which much of our agriculture and food production is located, sea level rise and high-intensity rainfall will damage our agriculture and destroy our food security. Our road and housing infrastructure also stand to be destroyed. Madam Speaker, better roads and draining system can be implemented. Madam Speaker, how much more long are we going to wait? We are aware that the government will be implementing climate change policies, but tell me, are we aware that all of these will be happening for sure? Aren't we aware that more needs to be done? Aren't we aware of our people in the interior who are at more risk when it comes to climate change? Tell me, Madam Speaker, if every time there is flood occurring, people have to move from their homes and go elsewhere. Farmers have to look at their crops and suffer the disappointment. Fishermen have to look at the rivers and creeks and suffer the outcome. And then there's families who will not be financially stable, families who won't be able to eat 2 times a day at least. The school children in all over Guyana, especially in the interior. How long are they going to be home when there's a widespread of flood? A lot more can be done than this now, Madam Speaker. Guyana can also play a great role in mitigating climate change through the continued conservation and sustainable management of its forests by avoiding deforestation. Nobody should have to suffer, not even our animals, Madam Speaker. We know that the loss of our trees can cause climate change, desertification, soil erosion, fewer crops flooding, increased greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and a host of problems for the indigenous people. In addition, Madam Speaker, to the loss of habitat, the lack of trees also allows a greater amount of greenhouse gases to be released into the atmosphere. Healthy forests absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, acting as valuable carbon sinks, regardless of somewhat it may be called nature and weather is uncontrollable. But the impact on climate change is real, and regardless that our country benefits in ways from deforestation, especially from gold mining, it is still a threat to our people's lives. Deforestation can be solved. Plant back the trees as they are being cut down. Let's treat our green economy to its best because we depend on them. Let's not sit and waste time over what's unnecessary. Also, Madam Speaker, the government needs to ensure that the oil and gas developments are in keeping with our development philosophy and climate change ambitions. Ever since those discoveries, Mother Nature has continued to bestow her bounty on these erstwhile poverty-stricken plural societies. While the nation is clearly on the cusp of wealth, it is also pursuing a green economy as part of its articulated low-carbon development strategies. This duality presents a real challenge for a small developing nation that is seeking to balance its oil resource exploits and response to climate change. Don't you think that our communities are vulnerable to flooding? Don't you think that it's also vulnerable to droughts, among all other effects of climate change? The government have to pay more attention and to ensure that the oil and gas development does not erode the gains we have made over the years with our environmental stewardship known globally as it relates to climate change. We need more considerations and actions which are in keeping with the nation policies, direction for addressing climate change, as well as ensuring that there is compliance with the relevant laws and regulations.
Member, your time is up.
Can I have
Madam Speaker, I move that the Honorable Minister be given 1 more minute to conclude her speech.
Keeping with the nation's policy directing for addressing climate change challenge as all well as ensuring that there is compliance with the relevant laws and regulations covering these and other issues. Madam Speaker, let's find a right balance between our environment and development. I rest my case.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Titan Jones, Minister within the Ministry of Housing and Water, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Intelligent members of the government, members of the opposition, representatives of the media, audience all. A pleasant day to you. The charismatic Barack Obama once said that the world must come together to confront climate change. There is a little scientific dispute that if we do nothing, we will face more drought, famine, and mass displacement that will fuel more conflict for decades. With that being said, it is with great pleasure that I, the Minister within the Ministry of Housing and Water, bravely stand before you to further elaborate on the motion that the government should implement policies to reduce climate change. The Ministry of Housing and Water is responsible for effectively and efficiently formulating, implementing, and monitoring national housing and water sanitation policies, and to ensure the proper management of human, financial, and physical resources across the country. Climate change has been described as the biggest challenge to humanity in the 21st century. This is not only due to the expected serious impact of a changed climate on the livelihood of many people, but also because it causes deeply embedded in the socio-economic fabric of modern society. Statistics have shown that nearly 22% of the people in Guyana lack access to safe drinking water and do not have access to sanitation. Let me remind this Honorable House, and by extension, every citizen out there. According to the reliefweb.int, the 2005 Georgetown flood was a major flood in and around Georgetown, which approximately 290,000 people, 39% of the country's population, were affected, inclusive of 34 deaths. Climate change will and already does impact the Housing and Water Ministry by depriving people rights to water and sanitation by causing floods and droughts. Changes in precipitation and temperature extremes, which result in water scarcity, contamination of drinking water, and the spread of diseases. Additionally, 98% of climate scientists agrees that the main cause of climate change is the human expansion of the greenhouse effect. One of the main contributors to the greenhouse effect is deforestation. Can't you see that climate change is threatening the forest with its global warming, which we, the government, knows can lead to forest fires and natural disasters? If this continues to happen, the effects of climate change will become more severe, which will constantly have an effect on my ministry by reducing my privileges to have forest resources to complete housing projects. Housing affordability is already being affected by climate impacts in many areas around the country. Homeowners are facing repeated damage to their homes that often requires costly repairs. Buildings are vulnerable to climate change. In the future, there may be an increased risk in collapse, of declining health, and significant loss of value as a result of natural disasters. If we do nothing and things continue right now, there will come a day when people will disappear from the face of the earth. But instead of ignoring problems, we are beginning to address when we can save our country and our future. Madam Speaker, adaptation strategies will and are being provided with the intention to inform and assist communities in identifying potential alternatives. They are illustrative and are presented to communities to consider possible ways to address anticipated current, future, and climate threats. It gives me great pleasure to inform the House that in 2009, a memorandum of understanding between the governments of Norway and Guyana was signed regarding cooperation
Honorable
to fight
member, you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Against climate change, in particular those concerning reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation plus. The Office of Climate Change and the Low Carbon Development Strategy was also established to work towards the reduction of the negative impacts of climate change. The Central Housing and Planning Authority is the agency in the ministry which is working along the Guyana Lands and Survey Commission to implement national housing and settlement policy through an efficient structured framework in order to release the development of sustainable, affordable settlements. This government also intends to build infrastructure needed to aquifer storage and recovery. To conclude, the Human Development Index shows that 96% of the country's population has access to improved water sources. Therefore, we, the government, plans to address the gap to provide clean water for this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable members, just a reminder that when you're addressing the chair, you have to stand. Thank you. Honorable Naomi Reddy, Minister of Housing and Water, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, honorable judges, colleagues of the general government, learned members of the opposition, delegates of the media, attentive audience. All a blissful days to you. The privilege is now mine to further support the motion proposed by us, which states that we should implement policies to reduce the impact of climate change. Madam Speaker, we contribute to climate change negatively and as such need to be a part of the solution. Every day we ignore the sign which therefore hinders our development. Take a look at what is happening to our everyday society. Flooding is widespread, affecting both residential and outlying areas, which can ultimately affect our potable waters. As such, we need to implement and upgrade our drainage system in areas that are prone to flooding. Also, when it comes to building and developing housing scheme as a part of ministry plan for the coming years, there there is a need for electricity for an efficient life. However, as a current, we as a country is heavily dependent on fossil fuels, which greatly contributes to the change in climate. As such, we need to establish policies to cater for alternative sources of energy which will significantly reduce the amount of carbon emissions emitted. Madam Speaker, we are all well aware that the majority of Guyana's population resides on the coast, and this region is the most threatened in terms of the drastic effects that climate change poses to it. Since it is below sea level, it is therefore prone to mass flooding if there is heavy rainfalls, which, as we know, inventable due to the change in climate. Therefore, we as the government is serious when it comes to the management of our people's safety of both their life and housing, along with their access to clean potable water. As such, in order to significantly manage flood waters within these regions, we will further upgrade our pipelines and drainage systems, effectively to drive off contaminated waters before it infects our clean water and the livelihood of our people. Take for instance, an article released by the Cable-Densive Commission, which states that more than 25,000 households have been severely impacted by floodwaters in June 2021. Madam Speaker, it is without a shadow of a doubt that the world is rapidly developing more advanced state, and Guyana is no different. As such, to make the lives of our ministry is implementing housing schemes for our citizens, along with electrical installation in each home. However, we can all agree that using fossil fuels is only contributing great to climate change, which worsens the already existing effects. Therefore, we as the government take it upon ourselves to implement alternative sources of electricity to power both residential and outlying areas in effort to limit the amount of carbon emission into the atmosphere. As the Honorable Minister of Natural Resources would have mentioned that a large amount of 135 million received from Norway is geared towards the implementation of renewable energy faculties. Using those alternative sources of energy is putting an end to the greenhouse gases production. These gases are what is accumulated within the atmosphere and traps heat, which leads to global warming and inevitably an increase in many natural disasters, which again affects the livelihoods of our people. That is why now high time that we stop playing around with words and put them into action once and for all, in which we will see the next generation can prosper. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate that we as the government will continue to work to put those policies into practice. Also, we will continue to work diligently to further refine the Guyana National Climate Change Policies and Action Plan 2020 and 2030. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Shakina London, Shadow Minister of Labor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I stand before you today as a Shadow Minister of Labor to speak on the pertinent issue of climate change that affects not only Guyana, but the world at large. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the former governor of California, once said, and I quote, "We simply must do everything we can in our power to slow down global warming before it is too late." The science is clear. The global warming debate is over. End of quote. The words "everything we can in our power" stood out to me, as I will not deny the fact that the government has attempted to put systems in place to combat this issue. I would like to commend their efforts, regardless of how minuscule they are, but unfortunately, they're simply not enough. Climate change can affect and has affected Guyana's labor force directly and indirectly in a plethora of ways. First and foremost, this issue has already negatively impacted the lives of workers and the comfortableness of workplaces. It has made work productivity dwindle at a frighteningly fast pace, and its negative impact is only going to become more pronounced as time passes. Rising temperatures will worsen working conditions and reduce labor productivity, while changes in rain patterns will inevitably adversely affect large industries, particularly agriculture, transport, and tourism. Jobs and good working conditions rely very heavily on the absence of environmental hazards, inclusive of storms and air pollution, and the maintenance of environmental stability. This speaks about temperatures staying within a particular range and predictable precipitation patterns. Climate change affects temperature and rain patterns and may render entire regions unproductive and make workplaces too hot for work. This can possibly lead to climate-induced migration, the proliferation of precarious and informal work, and an increase in unemployment. A significant proportion of the individuals who live in hot areas could experience negative health and safety effects, as well as reduced work capacity as a result of human-induced climate change. Increasing temperatures mean that employees are forced to spend a greater proportion of their hours at work getting some rest and cooling their bodies down in order to maintain the core body temperature of below 38 degrees Celsius and avoid suffering from a heat stroke. The increasing prevalence of heat stress reduces worker performance, and this is partly because slowing down is a natural defense mechanism against heat exposure. As one of the consequences of climate change, heat stress will continue to reduce the productivity of workers and give rise to negative occupational health effects and workplace injuries. Our country is particularly susceptible to this as we have a tropical climate. In addition, the low coastal plain, the home of the capital, and the majority of Guyana's major organizations is at risk of many devastating floods due to rising sea levels. These very organizations provide employment to an innumerable amount of people, and in the event that these floods are experienced, the rate of unemployment in Guyana will skyrocket. Before I depart, allow me to suggest a course of action that can contribute to solving this issue: reforestation and afforestation. This would be effective because of the ability of forests to regulate water flows, act as barriers against storm surges, and protect against erosions and mudslides. At the same time, the many other ecosystem services provided by forests create jobs and economic value for Guyana. Honorable members of the government, isn't this enough for you to pick up the pace and intensity of the systems that you say you will put in place to combat this issue eventually? Or will you continue to put the comfort, efficiency, and safety of your labor force on the back burner? I rest my case.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Phoebe Croker, Shadow Minister of Amerindian Affairs, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Famous entrepreneur, author, software developer, and investor Bill Gates posited, and I quote, "Climate change is a terrible problem and it needs to be solved. It deserves to be a huge priority," end of quote. As the Shadow Minister of Amerindian Affairs, I stand here today to state ways in which the government can ameliorate the indigenous people of Guyana on the facet of climate change. I am delighted that the government has seen the need to implement policies to reduce the impact of climate change and reduce greenhouse gases. However, as the Shadow Minister of Amerindian Affairs, I stand here to say there is so much more that needs to be done for the indigenous people. especially those residing in the interior. Madam Speaker, solar panels have been put in place to reduce greenhouse gases, yet still there are many Amerindian villages where there is no electricity. The children in such villages depend on small generators to provide electricity. These generators produce toxic gases which can be detrimental to one's health. According to the Chronicle newspaper dated on the 8th of October 2009, an entire family was wiped out from inhaling toxic gas from a generator used to provide electricity. Government buildings and schools have benefited from solar panels, yet in this day and age, a school that houses hundreds of students and has a dormitory still depends on generators for electricity. Madam Speaker, that school is Paramakotoi Secondary, and I happened to spend a few days there when the generator was down, causing the students to sleep in the dark for a few nights. Madam Speaker, this clearly shows that enough is not being done for the Amerindian people. Having solar panels will not only satisfy individual needs, but will also have a positive effect on climate change in the area and a country at large. According to science.org, solar panels fight global warming by producing electricity that keeps us from burning greenhouse gas producing fossil fuels. They also shade the earth from the sun. Madam Speaker, why is it that our Amerindian people have to be deprived of such basic amenities? Madam Speaker, additionally, I wish to commend the government for drafting a very comprehensive climate change action plan. But we must not let this be just another policy document. Its implementation is crucial to eliminating some of the many challenges Amerindians face as a result of climate change. According to a quote by Archana Sorin, and I quote, "Indigenous people, young people should be the leaders of climate actions, not victims of climate change policies," end of quote. This action plan must be treated with urgency, ensuring that the indigenous community is well able to adapt and combat the effects of greenhouse gases. Children are among the most vulnerable groups to the impacts of climate change. In developing countries, climate change is projected to exacerbate the top 5 causes of death for children under 5. These include acute respiratory illness, diarrhea, malaria, malnutrition, and neonatal deaths. The burden of climate-related diseases already falls predominantly on children in developing countries, and this will only worsen. At its core, climate change is an issue of equity, both within the current generation and across generations. Children are the least responsible for climate change, but will be left to bear the brunt of its impacts. Madam Speaker, there is a great need for internet access in Amerindian communities to make information on climate change readily available and accessible, since children are often excluded from the decision-making processes on climate change and denied access to the information and resources. Madam Speaker, how communities and governments plan for and respond to the impacts of climate change through policies and practical actions today will have a lasting effect on children's future. In conclusion, Madam Speaker, I wish to leave this quote by Kofi Annan, and I quote, "The world is reaching the tipping point beyond which climate change may be irreversible. If this happens, we risk denying present and future generations the right to a healthy and sustainable planet. The whole of humanity stands to lose." End of quote. I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Michelle Laud, Minister of Amerindian Affairs, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, credible judges, distinguished members of the government, intelligent members of the opposition, and attentive audience. A pleasant morning to all. I confidently rise today to further elucidate on the motion which reads, I quote, "The government should implement policies to reduce the impact of climate change," unquote. Madam Speaker, judges, and intelligent members of the opposition, the adverse and potentially catastrophic impacts of climate change are already being experienced in Guyana. Effects that scientists had predicted in the past would result from global warming are now occurring. Since the 1960s, Guyana has observed marked increases in temperature, sea levels, and the frequency and intensity of extreme rainfall events. Global climate is projected to continue to change over this century and beyond. The magnitude of climate change beyond the next few decades depends primarily on the amount of heat-trapping gases emitted globally and how sensitive the Earth's climate is to these emissions. Climate change-induced disruptions to natural systems have been linked to significant impacts, including disasters such as storms, hurricanes, and flooding. Further continued warming of the atmosphere at the current rate will result in substantial damage to water resources, ecosystems, and coastlines, food supplies, and health. As a result of increased storm surges and changes in rainfall patterns, we will have serious consequences for the country's economy, particularly for the agricultural, forestry, and fishery sectors, which are highly sensitive to changes in climate. As the Minister of Amerindian Affairs, it is my duty to ensure the safety of my people and their homes. Flooding in the interior is the main cause of loss of food security, since we, the Amerindians and residents, depend on our surroundings for a living. Vast arrays of flora and fauna have been a key source of our survival since ancient times. We depend on the forests to provide us with homes, habitats for wildlife, and food, as farming is the main activity done in the Rupununi. Another negative impact climate change has on our lives are forest fires. These forest fires that has been happening in our environments puts us all at risk. We lose our animals and farms. Flora and fauna, we lose our animals and farms. We lose our animals and farms that are our main reasons for survival and our pride. Climate change is sure to be the cause of extinction in the next years to come. If we do not take action and necessary precautions, on my own, I cannot save our ecosystems, protect our wildlife and our forests and rivers. Your support and actions are needed to help reduce climate change in our country. Together, anything is possible. Our national motto says it all: one people, one nation, one destiny. So, as members of Parliament, we have the authority to make a change, but it is our own interest. I ask you, intelligent members of the opposition, how would you like to see Guyana in the next 10 years? Would you rather prefer a country that experiences severe flooding in all parts of Guyana on a monthly basis? Or would you rather live in a country where it feels like paradise and live stress-free without thinking about the weather? So, in order to reduce climate change, the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs would like to propose policies to implement. Firstly, over the last decade, the talk on global major events and conferences, politicians and global leaders have campaigned under the idea of helping combat the issues of global warming. As such, afforestation had been one of the most talked about methods of dealing with global warming. Planting trees
Planting trees and promoting afforestation for a greener, brighter, and healthier Guyana isn't a choice that needs to be given thought. It should be done for the benefits of my fellow Amerindians and the benefits of us all. Finally, the thought of launching conservation programs in every part of Guyana to educate citizens on the importance of wildlife and our ecosystems, as well as protect wildlife by implementing rules or laws to strengthen the barrier in protecting natural resources, seems legit and should be taken into consideration. Therefore, Madam Speaker, intelligent members of the opposition, and attentive audience, this is why we, the government, stand strong in supporting the motion. The government should implement policies to reduce the impact of climate change. I rest my case.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Farhan Almodine, Shadow Minister of Agriculture, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I, Farhan Almodine, Shadow Minister of Agriculture, stand firmly here today to raise my voice on a very persistent issue that has been threatening the lives and well-being of many, not only in Guyana, but throughout the world. Climate change. I would like to commend the honorable member across the way for realizing that we are in dire need for changes when it comes to climate change. However, the policies in this motion are so vague and insufficient that the government will fall woefully short making those meaningful changes. Guyanese farmers suffer increasing vulnerability due to the unmerciful predictability of the weather. The rising incidence of flood bears witness to this truth. Allow me to bring to your attention Mr. Deodat Siodat, a vegetable farmer of Region 3, who has not been able to plan his crop planting seasons for almost 2 decades now due to the flood-provoking rainfall. With tears in his eyes, he told interviewers from Alliance Biodiversity that, and I quote, "Farming has been my livelihood. Since 2005 and until now, we can't predict this weather. We cannot plant really safely. I'm the sole breadwinner for my family, and I depend on farming for a living," end quote. Until crucial adjustments are made to this motion, its passage will not be fully beneficial to the Guyanese. Therefore, while we commend the government's effort, we remain averse to the motion as it is. Through Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, countries agreed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. However, the amount of carbon dioxide in the air kept on rising and heating the Earth's surface at an alarming rate. With Guyana being one of the poorest countries in South America and in the world, with 43.3% of the population living on 1,020 Guyana dollars per person a day. How can they put forward such an action plan when there isn't any backup plan put into place in case of any downfall? Are there even funds allocated in case of any emergency? Madam Speaker, I ask you, if Japan, one of the leading nations, would have failed in an action plan to stop climate change, how are we sure we would not? The governments also said that they will implement other climate change policies. What are those other policies? Are they being specific? Do they mean literally every other climate change policy? Is every man with a plan going to have his policy implemented on a nationwide scale? Don't get me wrong, I am not deflecting any of their policy. However, the motion falls short in some respect, and the manner in which it falls short would be detrimental to the Guyanese people. In some ways, it will cause more harm than good, and it will make the purpose of the motion, albeit more difficult and costly to implement, especially when there is no backup plan in place. What happens when the fund runs out? Do we go take a stroll to the bank for a loan? I thank you for listening.
Honorable Member. Honorable Shaquan Morrison, Minister of Agriculture, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, judges, members of the Youth Parliament, and audience. A good morning to you all. I stand in support of the motion that the government should implement policies to reduce the effect of climate change. Climate change is caused by various factors, some of which are inevitable, but I strongly agree that if effective measures are put into place, we'll have a more conducive environment, especially with the emphasis on agriculture. Some of the factors leading up to the latest events in climate change are biotic processes, airborne pollution, variations in solar radiation, and especially human activities contribute to changes in our climate. Our daily activities causes changes in the Earth's atmosphere. The way we dispose of our waste. People mostly burn their garbage. Think about the number of people that dispose of their garbage using this manner. This manner has a severe effect on our ozone layer, which causes global warming, as you all know it. Global warming causes our temperatures to rise drastically and also the melting of the polar ice caps, which causes massive flooding. And Guyana is severely affected by this since we are below sea level. Our country is well known for its agricultural production, and our economy as a whole largely depends on it. Our farmers have seen significant losses in both crop and livestock due to climate change. The intense rainfalls and flood have battered farmers across the country, and the government has set aside $7.8 billion to provide relief to these farmers that have experienced losses. Approximately 52,000 households across 300 communities had been affected by the unprecedented rainfalls caused by no other than climate change. In June of 2021, Guyana was hit by great floods. As a result, the entity lost $1.2 billion in sugarcane crops. Stated in an article of the Guyana Chronicle, situations such as these have a negative effect on the country's overall production rate of its major export, which is detrimental to our economy. We as a government should make sure that climate change doesn't affect such a vital economic resource to our country. Over the years, the government has spent billions of dollars on flood relief because of the events caused by changes in climate and how this tremendously affected agriculture, depriving farmers of the results they expected to gain from all of their hard labor. I therefore propose that we invest in preventative measures and enforce methods by which we can lessen the effect of climate change on our crop and livestock farmers across the country. The citizens of our country and the country itself must prefer vital, visual, effective information to the public in order to re-educate the nation about the severe consequences of our lifestyle and extra activities that causes climate change. The information must be able to give knowledge to each person in this society. I think if people, especially those in farming communities, are aware of the effects that their activities cause on their livelihood, they will most likely stop doing these things. Since we cannot ultimately control every change in climate, we need to put a halt on all of these things that we are doing that are affecting our climate. We need to put an end to all of this. We need to protect our environment and our natural resources, especially the citizens of our country.
Honorable Member, you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Most valuable resource of our country, which is our citizens, their health and livelihood are extremely affected by this problem. If we continue the same way that we are going currently, the road we are leading down, our country will end up in poverty in a number of years. That's my case.
Thank you, Honorable honorable member. Honorable Christel Welch, Shadow Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance of Opposition Chief Whip. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Climate change is one of the defining issues of our time. The atmosphere and ocean have warmed, has been accompanied by sea level rise. The impact of climate change on people and nature are increasingly apparent. According to Henry David Thoreau, and I quote, "What is the use of a house if you haven't got a tolerable planet to put it on?" End of quote. With this quotation, Madam Speaker, I stand confidently today to discuss climate change issues that have harmed our Guyanese community as the Shadow Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance and Government Chief Whip. Madam Speaker, please allow me to define climate change as stated by the United Nations, which is stated in the following sentence. Climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. These changes could be caused by natural processes such oscillation in the solar cycle. Since 1800, human activities, primarily the combustion of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas, have been primary cause of climate change. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration 2021 Annual Climate Report, the combined land and ocean temperature has increased at the average rate of 0.14 degrees Fahrenheit, 0.08 degrees Celsius per decade since 1880. However, the average rate of increase since 1981, 0.18 degrees Celsius or 0.32 degrees Fahrenheit, has been more than twice that rate. Madam Speaker, I stand to say in Guyana, we can expect Guyana's temperature to rise 1 to 4 degrees Celsius by the end of the 21st century. Sea level expected to rise 1 to 3 feet by the end of the century also. There will be changes in the pattern of rainfall, leading to more intense periods of rainfall and longer dry periods. Madam Speaker, fossil fuel combustion produces greenhouse gas emission also that serve as a blanket around the planet, trapping heat from the sun, increasing temperatures. Carbon dioxide and methane are two examples of greenhouse gas emission that are contributing to climate change. These are produced, for instance, while burning coal or gasoline to heat a building. Carbon dioxide can also be released during forest and land clearing. Methane emissions are primarily reduced by waste landfills. Among the major emitters of energy, industries, transportation, buildings, agriculture, and land use. Unprecedented flooding, heat waves, and wildfire have repeatedly occurred, causing billions of dollars in losses. Madam Speaker, allow me to deal with managing the impacts of climate change. Mitigation means to reduce or prevent the effects of something from happening. Mitigation strategies include alternative energy. Using alternative energy such as solar, wind, or tidal can reduce the use of fossil fuel. This will reduce the amount of carbon dioxide released in the atmosphere. Carbon capture in the process of removing carbon dioxide from waste gases, from
Honorable
power plants.
member, you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And storing it underground in former oil and gas fields or coal mines. As a result, less emissions are released into the atmosphere. By supporting the planting of trees, more trees will be presented to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere during photosynthesis. International theories such as the Kyoto Protocol which entered into force in 2005. The nation that approved the treaties agreed to cut back on greenhouse gas emission. All of the nation of globe came together in one pact in 2016 called the Paris Agreement to combat climate change. Madam Speaker, the occurred 6 keep warming significantly below 2 degrees Celsius, ideally at or below 1.5 degrees Celsius. The United Nations hosts a conference every year to talk about climate change. The Conference of the Party, or
Honorable
COP.
member, your time is up.
Madam Speaker, I move that Honorable Minister be given 1 minute to conclude her speech.
Honorable member, proceed.
Thank you. Between the 31st of October and the 12th of November 2021, Glasgow, Scotland served as the host city for the 26th Conference of the Parties. Each COP ends with a commitment from each nation to cut its carbon emission. Strategies for adaptation, global warming mitigation, and halting are not the goals of adaptation solution. They seek to mitigate its adverse impacts in response to climate change. Farmers in the agriculture sector will need to adjust since some more crops might not be able to flourish in a warmer climate. Risks reduction from sea level rise. Areas at risk from sea level rise may utilize sea defenses to keep the land from being washed away. In order to lessen the effects of climate change, the government must take additional action. Madam Speaker, we urge government to increase the urgency of improving climate change by mobilizing adequate national leadership in order to make Guyana a better environment for our people. And yes, we have funds given, but it is sufficient for continuous effect. Like my colleague said, what happens if it runs out? Do we take a stroll to the bank? Thank you.
Thank you, honorable member. Honorable Terian Wright, Minister of Education, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With your leave, I rise to make my contribution to the 7th Annual Youth Parliament supporting the motion of climate change for the government to implement policies to reduce climate change. As Minister with the responsibility of education, I would like to look at the Whereas Clause, which speaks to Guyana being particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change owing to the fact that 90% of Guyana's population live on the coastal plain and 75% of the country's economic activities are carried out there. And I will also look at Whereas Clause and how the government has significantly mitigated the effects of climate change by enacting policies such as the Low Carbon Development Strategy. To address these 2 Whereas Clauses, I will be focusing my presentation in 4 areas. The first is human development. The second is addressing the divide between the hinterland and coastland. Thirdly, adapting and modernizing the curriculum to address climate change. And lastly, I will touch on ensuring the requisite budgeting allocation is available to undertake the work that has to be done in the education sector. Madam Speaker, very integral to adapting to climate change are policies to support human development through education. Madam Speaker, let me point out that an educated and socially cohesive population provides the foundation for human capital development. Madam Speaker, this point is well articulated in both the Green State climate change. A key challenge, however, continues to be concerns in existing fields of training and learning. Education stands at the heart of this new agenda as a basic human right, as a transformational force for poverty eradication, as the engine for sustainability, and as a driver of dialogue and peace. If we do not take bold actions and prepare the learners of today for the future of tomorrow, all societies will be in jeopardy. We have to invest in nurturing and promoting to adapt to climate change, which may include knowledge, values, and attitudes, as well as technical skills that are crucial to stop climate change and sustainable economic, environmental, and social outcomes. From that standpoint, we can anticipate the learners in both formal and informal education settings will need to acquire these skills. As youth parliamentarians, we must support efforts to not only transform our economies, but also our education systems to encourage critical thinking, initiatives, and new competencies. Only then will we manage to make production and consumption sustainable towards sustainable innovation and reducing climate change. This calls for a new focus on recruiting, supporting, and training teachers across the spectrum.
Honorable member, you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The stakes are high, Madam Speaker. On that note, Madam Speaker, I wish to say that financial resources and sound investments are needed to address climate change, to both reduce emissions, promote adaptation to the impacts that are already occurring, and build resilience. The benefits that flow from these investments, however, dramatically outweigh any upfront costs. This is why the requisite budgetary allocation to undertake the work to be done in the education sector is critical. According to the United Nations, the task is large. The window of opportunity is short and the risks are real, like virtually everything else in the response to climate change. The development of new sustainable finance is not moving fast enough for the world to reach net zero. Madam Speaker, as I conclude, I am convinced that education is one of the most important investments a country can make to stop climate change. So we must invest now for a better future tomorrow. I am therefore pleased to support the motion of climate change, whereas the government should implement policies to reduce climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Rebecca Ganesh, Minister of Natural Resources, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In response to the opposition's argument, I would like to commend the fact that we can all agree that climate change is a pressing issue that affects our nation. A shadow minister stated that our policies isn't strong and they're vague and insufficient, and that there'll be a problem of a willingness of citizens in order to cooperate with these policies. Well, I'll say to that we already stated in our speech that we will create outreach plans in order to educate citizens of Guyana on climate-smart agriculture, while also helping them to adapt to the resilience to face this together. Two members of the opposition also stated that we attempted to put minuscule methods previously to stop climate change and that we don't have adequate funds. Do you call a significant portion of $135 million related to climate change funds minuscule? Do you call that insignificant and insufficient? Aren't we already doing things that can be able to help to mitigate this problem of climate change? Another point to make is that a shadow minister stated that Guyana is one of the poorest countries in the world. How is this so when our oil and gas sector has boosted us to the point where we're compared to countries like Dubai? In conclusion, we all can agree that this motion is significant and clear, and all points were made, and the motion should be carried. Thank you.
the Honorable Minister. The motion is proposed. That concludes the debate on the motion. I now put a question. Those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Those against say no.
No. No.
No.
The noes have it. The motion is negative.
I'd like to ask for a division.
Honorable members, this brings us to the end of our business on the order paper for this morning. Honorable Prime Minister, you may move the adjournment.
Madam Speaker, I wish to move the adjournment of the Assembly to 1:00 p.m. today, 17th August 2022.
The Assembly now stands adjourned to 1 p.m. today, 17th August 2022.
Ladies and gentlemen, you may be seated. Okay, just to let you know, for the viewers out there, that the second sitting for the 7th Annual Youth Parliament will be this afternoon at 1 o'clock. All right? Just a few pointers. Please remember that the voices, whenever you say eyes, the eyes and the nose, if you think that the other side wasn't loud enough, you can call division. You need to call it right away. You cannot wait until the Speaker, Madam Speaker, makes a ruling and then now you're calling for division. Okay? You need to be a little faster when it comes to that. But all in all, I was impressed with the speeches this morning. I was impressed with the fact that you were so brave, and the future is bright for Guyana. And with that, I would like to say thank you very much for being here this morning and for putting your best foot forward. To our judges, thank you so much for doing everything that you have to do with all the tallying. I know that you're starting all of that, so thank you very much for listening today. And I'm pretty sure at the end you will give or explain to some of the members of Parliament, the youth parliamentarians, what are some of the negatives and the positives of being here. So with that said, excuse me. So with that said, I would just like to say goodbye for now, and you would be directed by the ushers for your lunch. Thank you for now. Goodbye.